It's like an 800 square mile area in Maine where there was like 800 encounters, like officially reported. And you know, you as well as I'm sure a lot of your listeners know that not every sighting gets reported. So if I'm looking at 800 reported sightings, that probably is triple the number of what's actually happening, you know. So there might be, you know, like 2,400 sightings in this particular area, and I called it the Somerset Triangle just because so many strange things happen just in this, you know, 800 square mile area. It's wild.
This is Slidell Burton, the esteemed mayor of Steeds Ridge, the head honcho, if you will, and you are going to listen to my favorite show, Let's Find Out with Diego. And that's how it's going to be now, you hear?
Are you curious about the unknown, the unexplainable? Do you find yourself intrigued by the mysterious and paranormal side of our world? Join us on an adventure into the world of inexplicable discoveries and investigations that may someday give us the final answer as to what may be behind the veil of reality. The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's time once again for Let's Find Out with Diego. The universe is waiting for you.
The borders of space and time have opened once again, and transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia. It's another episode of Let's Find Out with Diego. Thank you for taking this journey with me. On this episode of Let's Find Out, from a young age, our guest has been drawn to the mysterious allure of all things paranormal. His journey into the extraordinary started with a UFO sighting at the age of 4, igniting a passion that would shape his entire life. He has dedicated himself to the relentless pursuit of unraveling these stories that lurk in the shadows of our reality. His book, UFOs Over Maine, weaves together the tales of everyday people who have encountered the inexplicable, emphasizing the profound human connection that transcends the veil of all the unknown. All this plus more. Please welcome back our good friend, creator, writer, researcher, and investigator, Nomar Slevik. Nomar, my friend, welcome back to Let's Find Out. It's been forever now, it feels like.
I know it's been a little while, but it is a pleasure to be back, Diego. I appreciate it.
Yes, and you were one of the early guests that was highly recommended by Adam Beacon. And
Yeah.
we really dived into the subject of UFOs and the stories of the folks close to you, actually, over there in Maine.
Yeah.
We'll definitely dive into that soon, but let me ask you this, because can you believe it's been about 10 years since UFOs Over Maine has been released?
That's wild. That's definitely wild. And you know, the first time I was on your show, the new 10th anniversary edition wasn't even out yet. I was still working on it. So it's been a crazy 10 years, man. And it doesn't really feel that long, you know, because it goes by just like that. But thinking like where I was in life 10 years ago in 2014 and everything that was different and and where it is now, it's still not perfect by any means, but I feel like I'm in a better place, you know?
Yes, and I mean, now being 10 years later, and I did order the 10th anniversary. I have it right there on my right.
Yeah.
So the listeners, they're not going to be able to see it, but when you look back over that 10 years, and I know you re-released it,
Yeah.
when did the thought come to you about, you know, well, I had the book, I released it 10 years ago. You look back at it, and there's more you
Yeah.
want to put in there. So what is the difference between the 10 years ago till now?
It's quite a lot. So I'm just constantly collecting strange stories, and 98% of them are UFO stories. It's also a big passion of mine, but I do collect all different kinds of stories. But I think it was maybe about 3 years ago now. I had released a horror fiction book. All of my other books have been nonfiction, extraterrestrial books. To varying degrees of success. But I had released a horror fiction book, which I have been writing since like childhood. I just love horror and I love horror fiction and all that good stuff. And it didn't do well. I don't think people were expecting, a nonfiction UFO author to release a horror book. So, I still love the book. I stand by it. And I think it's some of my best work, but it didn't do well. And this is what I do for a living. So I was like, all right, I need to put something out soon. What can I put out? And I was like, I guess I could do another book on UFOs, but what's my angle? What do I want to do this time? Should I do a one-person subject like I did with Mike Stevens in my book Granite Skies? Or should I do another collection of stories? And that's when it struck me. Wow, I think in 3 years, it'll be 10 years since UFOs Over Maine came out. Let me get that book. So I pulled that book out and I reread it. And it's like 135 pages. It's nothing, It's flimsy. It was my first book, but, I'm still proud of it and all that great stuff. But I read it and there was like 20 encounters in it. And, I read it within an afternoon. And it was also really cringy, like my writing style. And, so I've grown since then. At least I hope I had. So I think it was after I read it, I was like, I want to put out the UFOs Over Maine that I envisioned, back in like 2005, because that's when I first started like contemplating, writing a book. Obviously, it didn't come out until 2014, but I had worked on it for quite a while. But anyways, I was thinking like, I need to dismantle this book and build it up from scratch again, and not only include every encounter that's in the original book, but I need to add all these other stories that I've collected over the years. So I added 150 more stories. Wow. And I completely rewrote everything from the first book, and then obviously wrote all the new stuff. I would say 80% of them have never been published before. And I re-interviewed some people. I interviewed new people, and then other stories. If I couldn't get a hold of somebody, I just did my best to, write, with the information that I had. And it took me about 2.5 years. I was under the gun because I needed to get it done by 2024. And I think I had started this process right at the end of like 2021. So I gave myself an awful deadline, but to reach that 10-year mark, I also needed that deadline. I needed it to be out in 2024. So I got it done. I got it done right at the end of 2023. And I was still making tweaks as late as March of this year. And when you're an independent author, you can make changes up until you decide to publish it, So that's what I did. And I had a lot of help. My dad read the book, and then I have a couple of other proofreaders that helped me. And then I have this woman, her name's Valerie LaFosso, and she's amazing. She's a medium and a writer in her own right. And she edited the book, and I got it all out and ready, and it was out by like March, April of this year, and been going strong ever since, trying to just sell as many copies as possible. I love every friggin' story in this book. There are some stories I wanted to tell in the original book that I couldn't, and now it's in this one, and that really makes me happy. And so I guess to make a long story longer, that's the creation process of UFOs Over Maine 10th Anniversary Edition.
And with a lot of these added stories, so it's one of those things to where, are you reading about these encounters and then you're contacting these individuals, or are you now so well known in Maine that when things happen, they go to you?
I'd say it's a little bit of a mix of both. I'll get people contacting me. I'll get a friend of a friend contacting me and be like, hey, can this person contact you? And then I'll also find my own stuff and try to reach out to people. But a lot of times I'm not even left with a witness's name. I just have the story and like a location. Maybe sometimes I have a pseudonym, for their name, but I don't have their real name. So, that part of it can be tough, and I just can't contact anyone. But yeah, sometimes they come to me and sometimes I find them.
Yeah, I completely understand. It's the same way with. I mean, you're a podcaster too, and you do your shows. I do
Yeah.
shows, and there's times where you can spend hours and you can't find anything, and then one story pops up, and that's when you start
Yeah.
researching. And it's one story after the other come around and around, which is good for us
Yeah.
because we get to put these stories out there.
Sure.
They're all important stories,
Yeah.
and I believe that uh, the folks want to tell this story. They really want to get it out there because I think it gives
Yeah.
them a sense of I wouldn't say closure, but it makes them feel better just to tell somebody who's listening and believes them.
Yeah, and I hope that's the case. Anyways, I always approach every story exactly how you're talking about, and because behind every story is an experiencer, and that's a real person with feelings and dealing with a whole bunch of crap, and it sucks a lot of the time for an experiencer. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. And if the very least, if I can just be a non-judgmental ear, that's what I'll be. There's a lot of stories that I still have that people have told me they don't want me to put out, and some of them are really great, but they have rescinded, and I always respect that, so I'm still sitting on some pretty amazing stories, but I'll just never publish them, because they don't want them out there. So, and I'm actually, this year in particular, there's an experiencer that I met with them once, and then we've been corresponding via email, and we're supposed to meet at another time, but then they canceled. And so they're having a hard time like grappling with what's happening to them, which is, it's disheartening, and I feel bad for them. And, but all I can do is offer to be there, and if they take me up on that, awesome. And if they don't, I don't blame them, and I wish them well, but that's been happening this year, and it's an incredible story, and some of it's related to something on a national level, which is really interesting, and but if I never get to tell it, that's okay, as long as this experiencer is okay, and for the most part I think they will be, but I wish I could do more.
And when you gather these stories, and you said a few people rescinded, now did you originally include those stories in the book, and then at the last minute they said, "Hey, sorry, I don't want it in there." You had to go back and just change it all.
For one story, yes. But the other people, they rescinded pretty early in the process. So it wasn't, it's not hard just to take it out. And even the one that was really late, it's still okay. You're just, I'm omitting, a whole story. So it's not like it's messing up the flow of a different story or anything. So it's not too bad. It's only an issue for me because I'm like, this is such a great story. I want other people to hear it, but that's, I don't want to be that selfish. Put it out anyway.
And with all these stories that you've gathered and put into this amazing book, and I know everybody has different types of experiences, whether it's an abduction or just a sighting or things like that. What is the common ground with all these stories? What is going on here that
Mm.
had these? Let me rephrase it. What was going on in their life that eventually this UFO experience happened?
That's a good question. There isn't always a common thread. Sometimes there is with, where it runs in the family or, something like that. But other times it's at random, and people aren't expecting it. And it just sneaks up on them and scares the hell out of them. So there isn't always something that, can be seen as a cause to why these things happen. Some people, it's theorized, because all of this is theory, because nobody knows anything, but it's theorized that some people have it in their bloodline. There's a certain type of, blood type that makes them more susceptible to these abductions. And, I don't know if I subscribe to that, but if somebody shares that piece with me, I'll put it in their story because it's part of their story, and I'm not going to censor that, regardless of my beliefs. Yeah, I think that answers the question, but yeah, there's not always one thing you can put your finger on, to why this is happening. And I wish we could, because then maybe we could like foresee some of this stuff, and people can sidestep them and not have to deal with it. But Yeah.
And I was one of those where I use the term loosely, and I don't mean it to. It's very definition, like generational curse, where
Yeah.
there are some families that experience paranormal experiences, not only themselves but their mother, the grandmother, grandfather. It goes
Right.
down by generational, and I kind of think sometimes the UFO thing is the same, to where
Yeah.
kind of like if you know National Geographic or these Discovery channels where they go in the ocean, they tag a dolphin, they tag a shark, and then they just track them during their whole life cycle. I
Yeah.
kind of think it's something similar.
Yeah, I can definitely see that theory and see the merits of that theory. Absolutely. It does seem something like that. It especially for some abductees that I've talked to, they feel like they've been messed with or visited their entire lives. And then, because a lot of them keep it inside and then they finally start sharing it and they're like, oh my God, like my dad saw stuff. And, my mother experienced stuff or grandma, whoever experienced stuff. And it's really interesting when you start going down the rabbit hole of families and how often that does occur. It does seem to run in families. Definitely not all of them, but it does happen.
In Maine now, Maine's always been known for UFO sightings. I asked this because it's my understanding that Maine is known for a lot of sightings of cryptids, and it's not a very
Sure.
populated state. And
Right.
sometimes Maine has the luxury of being a quiet state where people don't hear much about Maine, which is
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You guys are up there, but the story starts creeping down eventually. But
Yeah.
not as many UFO stories. Did that? I mean, you already lived it, but did that surprise you that these many UFO things are going on in Maine as opposed to like
Yeah.
cryptids?
Absolutely. Especially like really early in my research, I'm talking like 20 years ago. And even like as a kid, because like I had my own encounters, which I'm sure I talked about on the first episode that I was on with you. But, I had an encounter as a kid and then I was watching Unsolved Mysteries at some point and they shared a story about the Allagash Four. And that was about these four guys that were abducted up in Maine. And that was the first time when I was like, whoa, this can happen like in our own backyard and it happens to other people. It's not just me, seeing stuff or whatever. And that was really surprising to me. And it opened my eyes to ufology in general. And that's when I really started trying to take notice as much as you can at 8, 9, 10 years old, and then you get a little bit more serious when you're in high school and there are, other books that you can, look up or take out from the library and can comprehend a bit better than, somebody that's a preteen. And then getting into my 20s and stuff and this world of ufology has just exploded. And I'm reading about all these crazy cases, Betty and Barney Hill, Travis Walton, you know, and everything in between. Just so Roswell, obviously, and just all the huge, amazing cases that are out there, and to know that. When I start looking at my own state, sure, I start looking and there's a handful, and now there's 20. Well, the next thing you know, I have a few thousand. That's crazy. And then this one particular area, I don't have the book in front of me, but it's like an 800 square mile area in Maine where there was like 800 encounters, like officially reported. And you as well as I'm sure a lot of your listeners know that not every sighting gets reported. So if I'm looking at 800 reported sightings, that probably is triple the number of what's actually happening. So there might be, like 2,400 sightings in this particular area. And I called it the Somerset Triangle just because so many strange things happen just in this, 800 square mile area. It's wild. But yeah, so hopefully that answers the question. I can go on tangents. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine because we want to hear these things and about your experiences and stories from the people that you've spoken to. Now,
Yeah.
with all these stories that you find, and do you go to these locations and just try to get like a
Sometimes.
more of a feel of what they're talking about?
Yeah, sometimes if I can. It's not always feasible. Maine's a big state. It's like you said, it's not very populated, but it's huge. And, so to go from the tip of Maine to, southern Maine, that's a good long ride. And, gas is what it is right now. So that's not always feasible for me to take long trips. And if I'm going to take a long trip and it's going to take longer than a day, then you're looking at, food and lodging and, all of that takes money. So if I can get to a place, I'm certainly going to do it. But if I can't, it is what it is. And I still research as much as I can about a particular area because I do want to know about it. I want to know its origins. I want to tell a complete story. I want to know when it was settled. And one true common thread through every town in Maine is that the indigenous population was here first, and then settlers came, and there was a war, and it was awful, and their land was taken, and it sucks. And so that story gets told all too often in the new book because I don't want to shy away from it. We have a history, so that stuff like that is also in the book. But yeah, if I can get there, I will, and if I can't, I still want to know as much as I can. So, yeah.
No, absolutely. As you know, that's one of the things about being a researcher that you could really want to be able to connect the dots properly in order to tell the story. And and talking about that, because there are times where people may misidentify the experience they've had. It's one of those things. Was it paranormal? Was it UFO? And how do you separate the two? Because sometimes things feel like they could be similar, but I think when you do the math, it's vastly different. Is there a connection between those things?
I actually think there is. And what I've been trying to do in the last 10 years, I don't know about time frame. Time's an illusion since COVID. But it seems like the last long while. I'm trying to not look through stuff through certain lenses. I don't want to look through it from a ghost investigator lens, and I don't want to look through it from a UFO investigator lens or a cryptid investigator lens. I'm trying to look at it as unbiasedly as possible. And I think when you do that, it will help you to identify more commonalities. A lot of these things, like you were just saying, some paranormal activity does come across as extraterrestrial in some cases. For example, and this is back in the 1800s in Maine, but these people in a small town called Sullivan, Maine, they were experiencing, like the town was experiencing a haunting, and people were hearing disembodied voices and an apparition of a woman was being seen. It was really interesting. And this gentleman named Abraham Cummings, he was kind of like a traveling researcher and writer, and he was into the paranormal. So he's in Sullivan at this point, and they're telling him about this ghost, and he's out for a stroll one night, and he's interviewed a bunch of people, throughout his trip, but he's out for a stroll one night, and these two guys run up to him, and they're like, "Hey, there's this weird glowing thing in the field. Like, you got to go check it out." And he thought the guys were drunk, and they were really insistent though. And so he's like, all right. So he went into the field to go check it out, and he sees what he described as a white glowing rock, like a boulder, something big. And he's staring at it, and he's like, is that some sort of ghostly apparition? Like, what am I looking at? And then he said, it starts to ascend. So now it's hovering, like tree line height. And he's looking at it. And after a moment, this being comes out of it and comes down to the ground. And he said the being was about 3 to 4 feet tall and doesn't look like what the dead woman that the town described looked like. And so he told that to this being. He's like, you don't look like the woman that everybody's describing. So the being shapeshifted into a taller, feminine looking entity. And he said that it had like this crown of like lights on top of her head, and it was like really shiny. And it spoke to him telepathically. And then the next thing he knew, he was back in the boarding house that he was staying in. He's like, what? So like he's back in his room now. So he runs outside and the UFO is gone and the little thing, the glowing rock and this entity is gone. And he doesn't know what to make of it, but he documented it all. And, some people read that and they're like, oh, wow, that's more evidence of the haunting. And I read it and I'm like, that sounds like a UFO and that sounds like a friggin' alien. Yeah. But maybe I'm wrong too. Is it connected? Like, are they just the same thing and we're using different words? You know what I mean? But it's all the same stuff. I don't have an answer for that, like which one is right. Probably neither of us, it's probably something else. And there's a different word for it. Maybe we don't even know what that word is, but that's just, one example of, the paranormal and ufology, like overlapping, and you can see it through one lens and describe it as a haunting and see it through another. And it's an ET visit. Interesting stuff, stuff like that just fascinates me.
Oh, me too. As you were telling me this story, I started thinking, okay, it could have started off as a paranormal, but now as you're telling it, yeah, I think we're looking at extraterrestrial activity.
Yeah, it's crazy, man. Like a white rock ascending, a glowing white rock. I was like, okay, well, that's a UFO, but I don't know. It's so crazy. But super interesting, yeah.
And that's definitely why we do what we do, to learn about these very interesting and amazing stories, because I feel it's important to at least, I'll use the word catalog these stories, and so that way they can last for years to come for the next person who wants to research and be an investigator. It kind of helps them along their journey. Yeah,
and hopefully, by what we're doing, that can lead them down a road that we just didn't get to the end of, and cool. I'm happy to be a part of that.
And from the first time you were on the show with me, I know you shared your experience as a young child with a sighting. Now, since that time, because I know you were very interested in paranormal as well.
Sure.
Have you gone on paranormal investigations?
Yeah. I had a team for quite a while. This was like before I wrote the book, the first book. But so I had a team for what? I don't even remember how long, 5 years maybe. And it was typically a lot of private residents that we would investigate. But we experienced some strange stuff and caught some really interesting EVPs. We caught, a cupboard opening. I don't think we ever really caught like an entity or anything, but some really great EVPs and some like anomalous videos, But yeah, I'm fascinated by it all. The ghost stuff, the cryptid stuff, obviously, and the UFO stuff, but even the more fringe stuff, black-eyed kids and dogmen and all the really, really strange cryptids that are out there. Right now, I'm working on a new book, and it's about humanoid encounters, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're extraterrestrial related. It's just that somebody encountered something that was humanoid in nature, but not a human. And I just got done this chapter about frogmen, and I love the Loveland frogman story from Ohio. And I knew that there was some frogman related stuff in New England, but I wasn't sure if there was something specifically in Maine. So I looked far and wide, and I got stuff from Massachusetts, from Connecticut, But, I like to write Maine-based books. And I finally found this story. I don't even know what year it was, other than between 1899 and 1915. Happened in there somewhere. But this author named George Arthur Cleveland, he wrote a book called Maine in Verse and Story. And he's a poet and he's also a writer. So some of the stuff in his book are poetry about Maine, and some of it is, stories that he got from locals. And this one story was about this guy named Silas Remick. And he had a homestead with his mother and father and, siblings and all that good stuff. And he was 25 at this point, and his father had passed away. And he's a really hard worker, and he was kind of like, the oldest child and kind of like the one in charge of the homestead. And he loved to fish, but he didn't get to go out fishing too often just because he was always freaking busy. And his father always told him to stay away from this place called Devil's Lake. Of course, it had devils in the name. But his father said it was haunted by a genie or gnomes or, it's really weird monikers or words to use for like a lake area to be haunted by. And so it always, made him curious about it. And after his father passed away, he said, F it, and he decided to go. So he goes to Devil's Lake, and I guess part of the lore of Devil's Lake is once you go, something keeps calling you back. And he didn't think that would be the case, so he goes, he catches a ton of trout. He's super duper happy. And a few days go by, and he can't stop thinking about the lake. And it's not about the good fishing, and it's not about needing to get away because work is too hard. He becomes obsessed with the lake. So he goes back. He tries to push it off, but finally a week later he goes back. And then he goes back some more. And now he's going like every couple of days. And his mom starts to notice because work is being neglected at the homestead. So she talks to him about it. And he's like, you know what? You're right. I am neglecting stuff. I am so sorry. I will do better, But he doesn't. He actually goes to the lake more. He starts going every day. They've got plenty of fish, which is great, but the homestead is suffering. So he goes one time and never returns.
Oh.
His mother is beside herself, so she waits until nightfall. He's still not back. So she goes to the neighbors and then the neighbors beyond them, and they create a search party. And so the searchers are going out, for like weeks. And they actually finally, they find this path that goes up to Devil's Lake. And in the path area, they find his rod and his hat and the trout that he caught, like what's left of it, because, animals got to it. But there's no Silas Remick. So they go home, they tell the mom, and she's devastated because they think he drowned or got killed or something, So about 5 years go by. And there's this local guide. His name is Duff Baker, old kind of grizzled Mainer. And he's a nature guide. And this wealthy New Yorker guy named Belmont, he hired him for the summer so he would cook and take care of his properties and stuff in Maine. And they actually became pretty good friends because they were both always on the property together. And Belmont really liked the paranormal and the supernatural. And he was always trying to talk to Duff about it, but Duff didn't believe in it, so they would have a lot of arguments. And I think on the 5-year anniversary, they might've run a story in the paper about Silas. And so Belmont throws the paper at him. He's like, well, what do you think about that story? What the hell happened to this kid, And Duff's like, he drowned, like there's nothing paranormal. Like, yeah, but it happened at Devil's Lake. You know what they say about Devil's Lake? So they go back and forth about this. And so Belmont finally challenges Duff and he's like, let's go up there if there's nothing to it, And Duff's like, all right. So the next day they get the canoe and they take the hike, so they hike basically where Silas Remick would hike, to go there every day. And they carried their canoe. And then when they got to Devil's Lake, they found an area to put the canoe in. And now they're checking out the lake, and they're sailing around and checking the area out. And to Belmont, it kind of looks like there's like this mountainous area. And to him, it kind of looks like it's this old volcano. It's just a really odd landscape that's not normal for Maine, in his opinion. And they're sailing around, and after an hour of them looking around the area, the water gets disturbed in front of them, and there's like a splash, and they're like, what the hell? And it kind of calms down and the ripples start slowing down, and they notice that there's like a bottle floating in the water in front of them. And it's close enough now that Belmont grabs it. And it's this old pickle bottle that had pickles in it, but the outside is really like cloudy, so they can't see inside of it. So they put it in the canoe and they head to shore. Once they get to shore, Belmont pops the cork that that was on the bottle. And it turns out that there's all these papers in it, but they're wet. So it wasn't a tight seal. So he lays them flat on the rocks, and it was June in Maine, really hot. So they dried out pretty quickly. And what they saw was a lot of handwriting on paper. So Duff picks it up and he starts reading through it, and he's pausing in various spots. And then he like quickly jumps to the end. He wants to know who wrote this, and hopefully they signed their name. And when he looks, it's Silas Remick. He signed the papers. And so he handed the papers to Belmont, and Belmont reads it, and it tells the story. Silas told his story of what happened to him. So he was up at the lake, and he had been going for weeks and weeks and neglecting his homestead. And one time when he went up there, he saw these two people, these two guys, standing up on a ledge by this mountainous area. And as he got closer, he could see that they were naked. And as he got even closer, he could see that they weren't humans at all. They looked like a 5 or 6 foot tall person, but with the head of a frog. And it kind of looked like their body like didn't have a head. The head like just went right into the torso, kind of like a frog does. And it scared him, but it didn't keep him away. So he kept going, and he kept seeing them, but they kept their distance and he kept his distance, until one day he went, and he said that they popped up right in the middle of his path for him to get home. And it was 2 of them. And they took him by the arms. And then he doesn't really know what happened after that. He remembers waking up, and he's looking around, and everything has this weird haze around it. And his breathing is kind of labored, but he can still, he's getting his breath though, but it feels different. And then he feels weird, and he's looking around, and he looks at his arms, and he realizes that he's underwater, and he's breathing, and he can see frogmen around him, and he can see their homes, and he doesn't know how deep it is. And they're kind of like keeping him in this room. He's locked in this room. He's not allowed to leave. But every once in a while they transport him somewhere, but they make sure to like shackle him, and he can't get away when they transport him. But this happens every couple of days. And he started to notice on some of these trips that he could see a light or something above him. And he thought that was when they were closer to the surface. So what he did was he found some papers, and he found this pencil, and he was really surprised to find that he could write underwater on this paper with this pencil. He could write. And when he was done, he was still wearing his clothes from the day, and he had that old pickle jar with him, with his pickles, and that's what he snacked on when he went fishing. And he emptied all the pickles out, and he, wrote down this letter of everything I'm telling you right now and shoved it in the bottle. And he just hoped someday somebody would find it, read it, and tell his mother what happened to him. Because she passed away at this point, and, had a broken heart that her son went missing. But that's the story of frog people from Maine. And it was just fascinating to find, and I couldn't believe I found it. And I can't wait to put that story, to have other people read that story in the book,
Well, I can't wait for that story either, because I've heard about the Liveland frog, and then also with like melon heads, these things in Ohio, but now they're kind of spreading more. And
right.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No. Well, with the melon heads, I didn't do a ton of research into that with Connecticut, because I was trying to focus on Maine. But melon heads, and they have like, which is basically a derogatory term for like these inbred people. But they have also kind of gotten the moniker frog people because they have these really big heads and these really big eyes, and they look frog-like in their appearance. But again, I think that's just a derogatory name for, what these are. Like, I don't think they're related to frog people, but melon heads is another whole thing that's really interesting, and I need to look more into. But yeah.
No, it's interesting when you first started telling this story about the gentleman that went in the lake and then never came back.
Yeah, Silas.
Silas. I've heard stories about people. I don't know their names, but there's a handful of people that they said that when they started investigating Bigfoot, they got obsessed with it. It started doing more and more, and then actually started causing static with their wives and their families because they were
Sure.
never around, and then just always so obsessed with Bigfoot they go out in the woods for days and not come back. It kind
Yeah.
of has a similar feel to it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it was the lore or the allure of the lake. That's a weird word to say. Allure. Anyway, I think it's the allure of the lake. Like kept calling him, but was it the frogmen that were doing it? It's so interesting. And when he started seeing the frogmen and was cohabitating with them, keeping them at arm's length, or, probably much farther than that, he was still okay with going because this lake, he was obsessed with this lake, but it was probably the allure of the frogmen or something, they enchanted the area.
Yeah, they had to have some sort of power over
Yeah.
his will somehow, and then he's like some sort of magnet to keep bringing him back to the lake.
Yeah. And then for them to make their move, I don't know what took him so long, because he went every freaking day, but they finally got him.
Oh, they sure did. They sure did. And now with a collection of these stories and going back to the UFO part, have you been contacted by any of the major UFO organizations, maybe asking for your help, or maybe if you could elaborate more on their stories so they can do their own research?
No, I haven't. I have had to reach out to them for like specific permission and things like that. MUFON, they were, they were okay to ask for permission. I actually spoke to Jan, who used to front or was the I don't know I can't remember what his exact title was now. Jan Harzan was his name. And they had since found, like, he's been since arrested for like CP, which isn't good. And but I actually talked to that dude. It makes me sick that I actually talked to him, but I had to get his permission on some stuff. And but they don't make their records available to the general public anymore. You have to be a membership, meaning you got to give them money for them to allow you to use their data. So I just don't use their data anymore. But Peter Davenport of New Fork, he keeps all of his data publicly stored, so you can go online and look at every record he's ever documented. And he and I had a conversation, it was a while ago now, maybe 2016 or something. Super duper nice fellow, really cares about the UFO phenomenon and document it as a matter of record, So that's a gentleman that certainly doesn't need my help, but I needed his. I wanted to make sure I had his blessing to like use reports. And he's like, yeah, just make sure you properly, cite where you got it, which I always do. So he was really cool. But yeah, those guys, they definitely don't ask for my help. But I have been contacted by, some media, some local, some national, for me to just like comment on certain things. And so that's been kind of interesting, but also a little invasive at times, like they all have their own agendas. So as long as I stay true to myself, I'm cool with talking to people like that. I just do want to make sure I, protect myself and protect the people's stories that I'm telling,
That's very interesting because I would have thought that perhaps, because your stories are so well put out and the information is out there, and I guess it may be, maybe I'm wrong, it could be a pride thing, like they don't want to go to anybody else but their own folks for the information. And that's fine too, they can do that.
Yeah. And I think it's a little different too, because like these are just, all they're doing is like taking reports, and documenting them for public record. In MUFON's case, if you pay them, it's you can get those records. What I do and what some other people like me do, and like what you do, we like to take these stories and make them more digestible for people. Like, it's boring just to be like, a light in the sky was seen at 9:49 p.m. in Southwest Harbor, Maine. That's boring. You know, like I want to know what happened before that, the week before that, what happened after it. You know, let's get into like, did strange things happen while you were growing up? Well, the next thing you know, you're building a narrative around this nugget of information, this nugget of an encounter. And then once I get a little bit more of that built out, I can then start adding to that the town information. You know, what's the history of the town and what happens there? Has there been other encounters there? Were there other encounters that were reported around the same time? And maybe it was the next town over or 10 towns over or the next state over, but was it, you know, were they described in a similar manner, and was it just a few minutes later? And I've run into that a million times. So once you get all of that, you're really building a cohesive story so I can present it out to the public by either my books or a podcast or something. So it's more easily digestible and interesting to digest. Whereas MUFON and New Fork, they're just like data gathering, you know. So I think we're in two different spheres, and that's why they do what they do their way and I do what I do my way. And I also think that's why I need their help more than they need my help, you know.
I completely understand it. And I know you're a man that doesn't hide any stories. So for the listeners of Let's Find Out that want to get themselves their own copies of UFOs Over Maine, and maybe they want to reach out to you in case they have something they want to report, how can they do this?
Sure. I have my own online store. And when you buy directly from me, that's like really helpful monetarily, but also you get an autographed book, and you typically get a bookmark and a sticker, and that's slevikstore.company.site. But you also have to pay for shipping, and I understand money is, you know, what it is right now. So my stuff is also available on Amazon. And it's also available on Kindle and Apple Books. So you don't even need the physical book if that's not your thing. And so you just type my name into Google if you want, or into Amazon, and all of my stuff will come up for you. But if you want to go to my store specifically, slevikstore.company.site. And if you want to check out all of my other works, it is allmylinks.com/Slevik, Slevik. And he'll have it spelled on the title of the show, I'm sure. But those are the two big links, and that those two links will get everybody to all my stuff. Even the horror book that didn't do very well.
It'll do well now. I promise you that now. So my friend, with 2025 coming up, and I know last year you were very busy doing a lot of events and speaking. Where are you going to be at? Where can we see you?
Hopefully a lot of places. Coming right up in December, there's a authors writers fair in Bangor, Maine, which is one of the big towns in my state, and there'll be like 100 plus authors there, so I'm very excited about that right before the holidays, so that's fun. And then moving into next year, I'm hoping to do more library events and more paranormal events as they become available. There's a huge one happening September 6th and 7th in Augusta, Maine, and it's the Maine Paranormal and Horror Con. And me and Adam's mutual friend Jeff of Jeff's Traveling Boards of Wonders, he and his wife are putting it on. It's this huge event, and he's having a bunch of like horror icons come by, and he's having me and Mike Stevens come up, and we're going to be talking about UFOs. So that's the big event for next year, and hopefully a bunch more peppered in there.
Thank you, my friend. This has been another excellent episode of Let's Find Out with Diego. Please check us out on all our social media pages, as well as on YouTube and Rumble. Like, share, and subscribe. Also, Let's Find Out is on KGRA Digital Broadcasting. Catch the show on Saturdays at 2 a.m. For more information, please visit KGRADB.com. That's KGRADB.com. Together, we will get one step closer to finding out. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Until next time, my friends.
Let's find out with Diego! The power of Diego madness! Ooh, yeah! All content for Let's Find Out is property of co-host Diego and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, co-host Diego, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.